I was feeling wildly unrooted. And so I decided to go to the wild and stand amongst some trees and their roots. 18 months earlier, I had risked everything to leave my 30-year marriage and a lifetime spent in the closet. I left all of that to find my own path and to live my authentic, true self. And don't get me wrong, it was totally worth it. But all of that leaving had left me feeling disconnected and unrooted and profoundly lonely. And so there was nothing for me to do except go to the woods like people do in folk and fairy tales. So I hopped in my car and I drove to the Pisgah National Forest, parked at one of the trailheads, and started off along the path. And I know they tell you you're not supposed to do this, but I did. I left the trail and I started to make my own way into the woods. And I walked deeper and deeper. I walked and I walked into the trees until I stopped. Because there before me was a massive oak tree, so out of place amongst all this poplar and pine. It had great branches like arms reaching into the other trees, the ash gray bark deeply furrowed, roots like a giant's fingers kneading into the earth. And I walked up to it, and I stood underneath that canopy. I stood amongst those roots. I stood in the aura of that tree, and something in me cracked open. And I wept. I cried my loneliness. I cried my disconnect. I cried my uprootedness to that tree. Please help me. And through my tears, as I looked at the tree, the furrows in the bark blurred into lines on the face, and there was the face of an old woman. And she leaned forward and came out of the tree and stood before me. She had hair like a white forest standing on the top of her head, and her eyes were black like polished stones, and they twinkled with magic. The lines on her face, skin the color of the bark of the tree. She had no teeth, but a smile that said, "I know something you don't know," which of course she did. And I could tell that there was something she wanted to say to me, some message outside of words, but I had no capacity to hear her. She reached up her arm like a branch, her fingers like twigs of the tree, and she cupped the back of my head and pulled me towards her. We were forehead to forehead. She breathed. I breathed with her. And as our breath synchronized, that swirling sadness in me began to settle. And then gently, she moved her hand and touched my right ear. And a jolt of pain broke our embrace. She nodded, winked, and melted back into the tree. What the hell was that? Now, I am a teller of folk and fairy tales. I have spun a few yarns about fairies and wood sprites, but to meet one? No. There was nothing to do except to retrace my steps and go back to the car and head home. So I did. And at first I didn't notice anything different. I mean, sure, there was a buzzing in this ear and some pressure, but, given the day's events, that was not the foremost thing on my mind. Until later that night when my granddaughter Tori called me on the phone. I knew it was her because of the caller ID, so I swiped right and I brought it to my right ear like you do when you're right-handed. Tori, you got to call back. We got a bad connection. And I hung up. And she called back. And I swiped again. Hello? Hey, Grandma, what's up? Holy hell. It's not the phone. It's me. Well, as soon as we finished our call, I went to the urgent care. And they said, oh, it's an ear infection. We'll give you some antibiotics. And 8 days later, when the antibiotics were nearly gone, but my hearing still wasn't there, I made a connection with a specialist, and I went to see him. This is what we call idiopathic sudden onset sensorineural hearing loss. It's an inflammation of the auditory nerve, and the resulting hearing loss is profound and typically permanent. There's nothing we can do for it, and we have no idea what causes it. Well, he may not have had any idea, but I sure as hell did. And so as soon as I left his office, there was only one thing I could do. I hopped in my car and I drove back to the Pisgah Forest. I parked at that trailhead. I made my way along that path. I left the path and made my own trail into the woods. I walked and I walked deeper and deeper amongst the trees. I walked and I walked until I stood before that oak tree. Only this time, I was pissed. I trusted you. I came to you with my sorrow and my sadness, and this is your answer? I thought magic was here to help us. And I was so angry. I do what I do when I'm really mad. I cried. And through my tears, as I looked at that tree, the furrows in the bark blurred into lines on her face, and there was the old woman, and she leaned forward out of the tree and stood before me. And again, I could tell there was something she wanted to tell me, but I had no capacity to hear it. She raised her arm as if to touch me again, and I slapped it away. No, I've had quite enough of you. You're not going to touch me. You betrayed me. I came to you for help, and this is what I get? You take away my hearing so I feel even more isolated? No. I spat on the ground and I kicked the dirt in her direction, spun around and made my way back to the car. I am going to assume she melted back into the tree. Well, when I got home, everything was the same as it was before. For everyone else, but not for me. I was fundamentally different. You see, our ears work together in tandem to build a world of sound around us, and now I felt like my world had been amputated, and the distortion and the painful hearing It cut me off from the things I most like to do, like going to a restaurant with my friends. And I was so angry. And so there was nothing to do but to sit with that anger. And I sat with my anger until it told me that its real name was grief. And I sat with that grief, the grief of the loss of my marriage, the grief of a lifetime behind a mask that was not me, the grief of this loss of my hearing. And after I had sat with my grief and made friends with it, that grief gave me a handful of seeds, the seeds of acceptance. And I planted those seeds in my heart, and I watered them with my tears. And as they grew, something else grew within me too. Because it was painful to go out to a restaurant to be with my friends, I started to invite them to my house, and I cooked for them. And we talked, and we had conversation, and we played games. And I realized that we were experiencing each other differently. Because of the distortion and the pain in that ear, I had to really focus on what they were saying. I couldn't think about my to-do list or my grocery list. Couldn't even think about what I was going to say next. I had to just listen. But that kind of focused listening is exhausting. And then I discovered a trick. I discovered that if I softened my energy and opened my heart could hear my friends. My heart could help me listen. And with that heart listening, I experienced old friends in a new way. And I felt connected. I was taking a walk through the woods, not an angry tromp through a forest to an oak tree, but just a walk through the woods at the nature preserve here in Weaverville. And I was walking in the woods and I thought, hey, what if I tried the whole heart listening thing here? I wonder what would happen. And so I softened my energy and I opened my heart, and I could hear the trees. They were swaying ever so slightly in this light breeze, and they were singing a poem. They were singing, we are one in the mycelium, two-legged, four-legged, fly or crawl. We are one with you all. And I started to sing with them. And in that song, I felt rooted. Not long after that, the most remarkable thing happened. I was in my little house on Coleman Street, and I was puttering around, cleaning up and such, and I thought, I'll just practice the whole heart listening thing here. So I softened my energy and I opened my heart, and I could hear my dog. Now, the remarkable part of this is not that I could hear my dog speaking to me. The remarkable thing is that at that moment, my dog had been dead for over 6 months. But my heart could hear him plainly. Good human. Good girl. Good girl. Wonderful. And with that, I knew I'd never be alone. So there was only one thing I could do. I hopped in my car and I went back to the Pisgah Forest. I parked at the trailhead. I went along the path. I left the path and made my own way through the trees. I walked and I walked deeper and deeper into the trees until I stood before that oak tree. And this time, I was grateful. And I cried my gratitude to that tree. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. And as I looked at the tree through my tears, the furrows in the bark blurred into lines on the face, and the old woman emerged from the tree, and she stood before me. And this time, I had the capacity to hear her. There is great love for you here. Yes, grandmother. Thank you so much. We have a gift for you. And she lifted that branch of an arm and opened the twigs of her fingers and showed me a stone. We have infused this stone with our magic. Touch it to your ear and your physical hearing will be restored. I took the stone from her, and we had our forehead to forehead embrace. Grandmother, if I touch the stone to my ear and my physical hearing is restored and everything is easy again, will I still remember how to listen with my heart? Who can tell? That's the mystery of magic. And with that, she melted back into the tree. I have this stone, but I have not used it. I mean, think about it. If you were me, would you? Thank you.
Wow. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes.